Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Factory Must Grow, episode 13. Today, we are again graced by the presence of Galdoc. Galdoc, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful Monday this time. So today on the cast, we'll start with another mod spotlight. As usual, we'll discuss the recent Factorio Friday facts, and our main topic today is going to be a question and answer session with a bunch of questions from people on the Discord. And I'll just throw in right now, if you would like to add your own questions to these types of episodes or other episodes, just head over to the Krydania Discord or Galdoc's Discord even, and hit us up with any questions, and we'll get to them eventually. Before I dive into the show, I want to thank our patrons and supporters. All patrons get a special Discord color. The $10 and up tiers get access to a special Discord channel. And you can also support the podcast directly. There should be a link in the About section of the podcast. And as far as I'm aware, Spotify does not take a cut from that. So it's actually a direct support option, which is really cool, actually. So thank you for considering supporting the cast. But of course, you know what to do with your money best. So be wise about that. So we are going to move into the mod spotlight. Today we're going to talk about WarpToro 2. I don't even know if there really was a WarpToro 1, but WarpToro 2 is the main one, and it was made by Pyro Fire about 4 years ago. It's only got 30,000 downloads, and I think that's a little bit... Only, yeah, I know it's a big number, but compared to some of the other mods, I think it's criminally underrated. Because I would guess that this mod, more than most mods, appeals to the average Factorio player. Because there are a lot of the big overhaul mods, right? Bob's Angels, Pionodons, Space Exploration, and those are very different in the factory sense. You know, there's tons of new recipes, generally lots more complexity. Even with Krastorio, there's a lot more complexity. But WarpToro instead changes kind of how the game plays out. And it doesn't really add any new recipes. It adds a few new technologies related to the warping. But other than that, it's pretty much your same old Factorio. And so to summarize, you start with a platform, and I think it's a 30-minute timer. And you get 30 minutes on the planet before it warps to another planet. And the platform that you're on also produces a ton of pollution. So defending your platform from biters is a main part of the pack, but you have to go outside of your platform to go collect ore. So the early game is kind of hard to get your feet underneath you to get enough iron for bullets and defend yourself with turrets. But once you get going, you can defend your platform with all kinds of turrets and flamers, and then essentially the gameplay loop looks like you warp to a planet, you quickly run out and establish miners and oil rigs and stuff to try to collect resources from this planet, and then you defend from the biters that are constantly attacking you. Because not only does the platform produce a lot of pollution, but there's also a scripted spawn of biters, so there's pretty much a constant stream of attacks. And as you research more into the tech tree, you build a larger and larger base underground, kind of on the platform, but like where biters can't get to it. And that warps along with you. So you start to be able to establish more and more automation that doesn't have to get unbuilt before the warping happens. And then you even unlock these mining platforms where you can build kind of a mining drill setup. And then once you land on a new planet, you can go kind of click a button and it'll like deploy that mining drill setup onto that ore patch. And it is kind of like teleportation linked to your actual warping platform. So you don't have to like deconstruct it and stuff. So it's a pretty cool mod. It puts a very different spin on combat. It feels a bit more like a tower defense than a base defense, if that makes sense, because there's constant waves of enemies attacking and you have to figure out how to collect resources in the midst of that. It's a pretty cool mod. I highly recommend checking it out. It's hard to describe easily because it does operate a lot different than Factorio, but once you start playing, you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I don't know, Galdoc, do you have any thoughts on WarpToro? I know you haven't played it, but...
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple of questions. Like, does it have a winning condition? Like, is it you must survive for whatever, a number of waves, or is it like an open-ended thing where it's like Dwarf Fortress, find the fun, losing is
Yeah,
fun?
it's more. I think the win condition, if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, I beat the pack, so you'd think I'd remember more easily. But I'm pretty sure the win condition is getting back to the original planet, and you have to do like a special research for that. So
It's like that TV show Sliders.
yeah, so it's kind of like Vanilla Factorio, where the win con is a rocket, but I think you have to go a little past that to get to a certain research.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I'm actually curious about the underground part that you mentioned. So, like, I'm kind of envisioning it's another surface that you have some kind of access to. Um, how do you translate material between those two things? Is it just you can transport the character back and forth, or is there something more formal?
Yeah, that's a good question. You start out with just a staircase, and only you can walk between the levels, and then you do get some researchers that add like chests that sync their contents between the levels, and so you can feed items into one chest and then remove them from a chest on a different level. And you start out with just the two levels, but eventually you research another one, and eventually you research a level that has water in it, so you can kind of make steam, power production on that level. That then you don't have to like go find water when you land on a planet and all that to get steam.
Okay, cool. Actually, it sounds very interesting. I'm always a big fan of, for certain things like this, like time pressures. So having, you have this, you must get these things done, but how you achieve that is very open ended. So that kind of thing is always good.
Yeah,
by the way, just as a quick note, I threw my back out. So if you see me wince, it's because I've moved in such a way that it's making that little tiny muscle do a thing that my body says, "Hey, don't do that."
That's never fun. But yeah, so the WarpToro thing is interesting, like you said, because it adds a time pressure. And with normal Factorio, as long as you're defending against the biters, there's not a particular time pressure. It's just about like, are you defending from the biters that attack? But with WarpToro, there's the warping of the factory itself. And I think that produces a very different type of pressure, because you're actually like, oh, I need to get these tasks done, like the mining, or I need to put these buildings in a certain place. And there's this timer that's counting down. And then when you warp, it's like, okay, now we get to do a whole new thing again. And it's this nice loop of like, okay, I feel like I have time to do things, but we're defending against biters. And then, oh no, the timer's down to 2 minutes. I gotta get all my buildings collected. Otherwise, they just get left on the planet, never to be seen again. So it's pretty cool.
What happens if you're not on the platform?
I believe you don't technically lose, but you lose because at that point you can't do anything else. So you'd have to load a save. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the Factorio Friday facts. This one was kind of interesting. It was a much shorter one, after we get a massive Friday facts with Gleba details and all that.
Anything that follows that one up, that was a banger of a Factorio Friday.
It really was. Spoiling a whole new mechanic with spoiling.
I see what you did there. It's pretty meta.
Yeah, accidental. But yeah, with spoilage and everything, they dropped a lot of bombs, and this week they were like, we're going to take it easy on the spoilers. So it was more of a technical details Friday facts. They mentioned there's a multi-threading fix for a bug in multiplayer when people are playing with different amounts of cores on their computers. I mean, just crazy desync stuff that, they're talking about how they hunt down these bugs. And I thought it was funny that, they're mentioning something which anyone who's done any sort of bug fixing understands. 90 to 95% of their time is spent just trying to reproduce the bug.
Yeah.
And once that's done, the actual fixes usually tend to come pretty quick. They also improved the auto pausing functionality for multiplayer servers. So previously it would only stay paused until someone started loading in. Now it stays paused until someone's finished loading into the server, so biters won't be attacking when nobody's home.
Fairly wise.
And they also added an option to auto pause the server when players are joining, which can help if people have slower connections or whatever. And those are both pretty minor things. And then the last thing they talked about was being able to speed up construction task assignment for construction robots. Galdoc, do you want to talk about this one, or?
Yeah, sure. So like basically I don't know what the algorithm they were doing earlier was exactly, but basically so when you're talking about the order of complexity of a particular algorithm, you're talking about how much time is going to be needed to execute that algorithm. And instead of actually doing the nitty gritty of calculating this for loop takes this long, blah blah blah, instead what you do is you say there is a scaling factor, and that's essentially a way of measuring how big your input is. And you say that the order of complexity of this algorithm um, essentially is a function of it in such a sense. So it's like if it's squared, like your size, whatever your input is, if you have to square that in order to figure out how long it takes, this is usually not a fun algorithm. That means that if you have a really big input, you're going to need a lot of calculation time in order to execute it. Or at least, it tells you how much bigger it's going to get. Wow, I need to not put my hand that near the camera. Sorry. But what they did was they took it. I think the scaling factor in this case was the number of roboports, and that normally is not a huge, enormous number, unless you're playing something that either requires you to megabase or you simply are megabasing. In which case, I think the example that he was looking at had like something around 30,000 some odd roboports. I can't remember the number off the top of my head precisely, but
Yeah, 37,000.
Yeah, good lord, it gets so big. But it was causing basically a lot of lag, and it was just because the something related to how the bots got their tasks scaled with that number. I think it was
It was linear.
Was it linear? It was
Yep.
linear. Okay. And what they ended up doing was I think it was resetting was the one who was doing this. Basically redid the algorithm, so now it's like log n. And the reason you want something like log n is in order for you to go up, in order for it to basically double, basically it has to go up by a factor of 10. So there's some math here that's probably beyond the scope of what we want to do here, but just understand that it makes life much nicer. So
yeah. So basically, a linear, if the order of complexity is linear, that means if you double the number of roboports, this function will take twice as long to happen. So when you have 37,000 roboports, that's going to take 37 times as long each time you run this function as if you had 1,000 roboports. And the first upgrade they did was they figured out how to, and I don't know what this word means, deduplicated rectangles. They figured out how to like change, rather than looking at each roboport individually, they made a bunch of different types of areas that like combine things. I don't know. I'd never heard that word before.
Well, deduplication is essentially exactly what it sounds like. You take an algorithm and if you have that same information twice, I mean, I guess like in Blender terms, if you had two verts that were in the exact same location that were parts of a different thing, you could deduplicate by joining them or something. But essentially, it's if in memory you have that same information there twice, you would simply have it there once. But
all this to say, they turned 37,000 roboports into just 900 rectangles. So that's already making it about 40 times as fast, right? And then on top of that, they then changed the algorithm from, order of complexity linear to log n, which essentially means every time an exponential increase happens on the input, a linear increase happens on the time it takes. So every time you double it, it only adds like one more. So double would take twice as long. Quadruple would take 3 times as long. 8-tuple would take 4 times as long. And so you end up with like this massive reduction in huge amounts of roboports, which means the final result is that rather than only having 600 that can happen at a time, if you ever assigned like 30,000 concrete at once in Factorio and you didn't have enough concrete or bots, you would notice at the bottom it would only go up to 600. Well, now that's going to be essentially infinite, because something like 30,000, which previously would have taken a long time to compute, now takes basically no time, which is a pretty huge improvement. And this is the type of improvement that only shows up once in a while. It only shows up late game, or if you're pasting huge blueprints, or if you have a massive bot network. But it does show up, and it's just amazing how the Factorio team keeps finding like, oh, here's this thing that doesn't happen instantly. Let's make it instant. And it's just, I love it.
So to answer your deduplication thing, so basically you can imagine the I don't know if you have if you're showing it, but like there's a huge overlapping area, and what it's doing is it's unoverlapping the rectangles. Like if you have two roboport areas that overlap, it's basically making, instead of having two rectangles where it's having to recalculate this same area twice, it's pushing apart the rectangles and saying, let's just check these not overlapping things, if that makes sense. That's all it was doing.
Yeah, that's nice.
So yeah, that's always a good thing. And believe me, this was something that when I went over this on Friday, someone mentioned it's like this is good for speedrunners too, because like they tend to like anything that makes robots faster makes speedrunning much more pleasant. I don't know, it helps.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I wouldn't have thought that. Would the actual assignment rate of the robots have mattered? Because I guess it could take a couple extra ticks. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah,
okay, well,
I don't
let's
know how
move
many
on.
speedrunners are making 37,000 roboports.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe they're out there. I don't know.
That's what I was thinking. Is like, are speedrunners using numbers that are big enough for this particular improvement to matter? But I don't know. I don't know enough about speedrunning. But yeah, let's move on to some Q&A stuff. So this is going to be a fun episode. It's a little bit less on topic because not all of the questions are, about Factorio or automation games, but it's just fun to sometimes relax and just have a good chat. We will start with a Factorio related question, though. The first one comes from Dos Gringos, and he's asking, if you had to add one non-quality of life feature from a Factorio mod that isn't already coming in 2.0, what would it be?
A non-quality of life feature that isn't coming in 2.0. That one's tough because we also don't know all of what's coming in 2.0. But like, what counts as a non-quality of life feature?
So something like LTN would be a good example where, you have improved or increased functionality of being able to, assign trains a different schedule, or something like Squeak Through. Well, Squeak Through's halfway between quality of life and something else, but technically Squeak Through is
gameplay altering quality of life.
Exactly, because then it lets you walk between buildings. Personally, I think Squeak Through might be my pick, which is funny because I know Rygard was on the podcast saying that Squeak Through users are cheaters, but at the same time, I am a dirty Squeak Through user, and
I don't want. This is being wrong. I don't want to be right.
Exactly. So I want to be able to walk between my buildings. Don't at me. It's how I like to play. So I personally think the game would be better if you could traverse your factory without a line of buildings being in your way. But that's maybe just me.
I have a whole discussion about like deciding what is cheating is a personal choice, and you get to do it yourself. And if other people don't like it, that's fine. They can play the game the way they want to. So
exactly.
That's okay. Yeah, I think that I have a hot take on this. I would like to see something more streamlined for. Are you familiar with? I think it's not transport drones. It's the one where I think it was. It's got the little cars. You put the road down, and you have them go from pickups to drop-offs.
I think that's transport drones.
Is it transport drones? It's not the one where the planes fly and then explode after they.
Yeah. That's a different one. I think transport drones is the one you're talking about. I've never played with it, but I've seen it.
I tried to play with it, but the problem was that I didn't actually use it because I got to roboports too quickly. So I think that with some tweaking, it would be great. But I'm a huge fan of like these different logistical alternatives. So like you've got belts, you've got pipes. These are the very, very basic fundamental building blocks. But then you have things like circuit networks, trains, bots, like flying bots, the ones that, they feel cheaty, but again, the discussion. But I love things that give you alternatives to that let you create, like, that's what I consider to be an interesting design choice. So I would love it if that was in 2.0, but.
Yeah, so far they haven't actually spoiled anything new logistically. They're improving the trains a lot in terms of how easy it is to manage a larger train network, plus having the elevated rails and all that. And they are adding stacking to belts, which kind of gives us a little bit more throughput potential on a belt. But other than that, there haven't been any changes.
Major revelations.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if they're saving something in that sense. Now, okay, I guess I should also say moving things from one planet to another is kind of a big logistical challenge.
That's a new one, but that's like orthogonal to everything we've done so far.
Yeah, it's not quite in the same category of like, I have my base on this planet and I'm trying to get items 100 meters to the west. How do I do that? It's not really that type of logistical.
It's intersurface logistics versus intrasurface logistics.
Yes, exactly.
There's some big words. And if you played space exploration, you've done some of that, but it's not.
Exactly. Another interesting question that Dos Gringos asked is, how would you change beacons in vanilla Factorio, if at all? And this question, I believe, was asked before some of the beacon changes were revealed. And for those who don't remember, I'm trying to remember, they spoiled that the beacons kind of overload each other. So you get a square root return rather than a linear return as you add more beacons. Yep. And right. So the first beacons are better. And as you add more and more, they become less helpful. They're still helpful, but I think it balances out around 8. So now if you have like 2 beacons, that's better than it used to be. If you have 8 beacons, it's about the same as it used to be. And if you have 16 beacons, it's worse than it used to be. But that's somewhat compensated by having quality both on the beacons and the modules for, you can end up doing a lot more with your modules and beacons. So all that to say, should they have changed it more? Is that still a boring mechanic? Did they juice it up and spice it up enough to make it better? Is it good? I don't know.
I mean, so the mathematician in me squeeze whenever I see it. I'm like, yay, math. But like, they basically took a couple of points and they fixed them. They said it was like, I think it was 1, 8, and 16. Those were the numbers that they used. I think that's because 16 is the number of them that you can get around a 5x5 entity, if I'm not mistaken. I never actually beacon that much, so I think that's right, but I'm not sure.
Can't you get 16 around an assembler? No, I guess you can only get 14 around an assembler.
Is it?
Or no, sorry. 12.
Yeah, I thought it was 12. I think 12. It was 8, 12, and 16. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that it's good that they kept that, and what's more important, at least from the modding perspective, is that they actually gave you access to the numbers so that it's just a table. Like you can fill that table with whatever values you'd like. So if you want to use that square root, fine. If you don't, then other modders can do whatever they want. I think that's definitely plenty, with one caveat. The system that I would have loved would have been, I would love to have it so that a beacon only influences each assembling plant can only be influenced by one beacon at first. And then you get a tech that you have to research. So then it becomes 2. And then whatever so then you actually have some sort of reason to do more researches. And when you actually get access to more, it feels impactful. Like you feel like you want to go redo it. But I also recognize that might be a bit overly granular. So
yeah, there's a lot of interesting discussions around beacons, and it shows up on the Reddit. I feel like every week, people are talking about the main 2 that people talk about is the space exploration versus the standard. So those who haven't played space exploration, they have beacon overload. And so only one beacon can affect each building. And if you put 2 beacons affecting a building, the building won't even run. Now, obviously, the better solution, which I just don't know if it works in the game engine, would be it picks the better beacon that's affecting it and only uses that one.
Sure. Yeah.
But all that to say, it's a very different strategy, but some people on the Reddit have observed, and I agree with this observation, that really it's still the same thing. If you're building an optimal factory, you're still just going to build a grid of beacons and a grid of buildings. It's just that you're building way more assemblers than beacons in the space exploration version. And in the vanilla Factorio version, you're building way more beacons than assemblers. But it's still the same concept of I build a line of assemblers, I build a line of beacons, and you just keep repeating that ad nauseum. And neither one is really gameplay, like the core gameplay element. They're not doing anything different. And I've thought it's kind of like the clean room mechanic that some modded Minecraft has done and some other games have done would be an interesting way to do beacons, where you build an area of tiles, like imagine like a special type of concrete tile or something. And then you have like a central part of this section that affects the whole area, and anything you build on top of that area, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a square area, anything you build on top of it receives the effect. But maybe the bigger you make the area, it changes the math on how the like central, we'll call it a beacon, affects the area, or maybe different buildings receive the effects differently in certain types of rooms. So you could have one room that works really well for assemblers, but not other buildings. And so you're kind of incentivized to build like, oh, I want to assemble a lot of things here. You could even, again, the engine wouldn't support it right now, but if you're developing the engine, you could make it so that electronics receive a bigger bonus than other types of assembling. So then you'd be incentivized to put all your electronics in one type of beacon area in this world, but you wouldn't want to put a bunch of like copper cable there because it wouldn't receive the same bonus. And then it kind of changes how you want to build, because right now a lot of people build the copper cables right next to the green circuits and they do direct insertion. But in this case, since you wouldn't get the bonus on the copper cables, maybe you wouldn't want to build it that way. And I feel like you could introduce some more interesting design elements by having kind of these restricted beacon effect areas. It would also have a lot of downsides. I'm not necessarily saying it's just a better mechanic full stop, but it could be an interesting change, you know, of like how beacons could work differently.
Yeah, so like to dovetail on that. So actually, it was a few months ago when they almost a year now. Wow, when they introduced quality, I made a follow-up video to that, and I actually talked about exactly that idea and a proposition for it using quality. So like you would set out these tiles. Maybe one's good for woodworking, maybe one's good for electronics, clean room stuff, maybe one's good for whatever. And the differences would be things like maybe you get a higher quality product by using these. Like it just goes up like a quality level or something. Or maybe it creates less pollution. Like let's say you put like assemblers in a factory floor that's designed to help cut pollution. Or maybe you do, you know, whatever, any of the game mechanics, any of the numbers that you have become accessible to you in this idea. Obviously, as you say, the engine, it's not so much that the engine doesn't support it. You can hack some of these things, but so like in space exploration, there's a thing where you can make it's a little bit of a spoiler, you can make spaceships and do this moving around of things, but it does so basically via Lua scripting, like runtime Lua scripting. So you can get some results with that sort of thing if one is willing to put in that kind of time. And I think at least right now, especially considering that 2.0 is right around the corner, he said, with air quotes, not because I'm doubting that they're actually going to release in October. I think that's what they said it was, something like that. But like, you know, life happens, stuff happens. So we'll see. But either way, it's probably best to, at this point, wait and see what's actually going to come because, you know, as we're seeing with the Factorio Friday facts, we're getting cool stuff. But no, that clean room idea in general is just wonderful to me. It offers many more interesting design choices. To touch one last before we move on to the beacon idea, one of the things that excuse me, that we have to be cognizant of as we design stuff, like if you're a modder, right? You want to be aware of how many times you're having the player do a certain thing. So rebuilding is one of these things that I kind of hate doing, but I also recognize can be very interesting. I don't like the teardown step. I don't like the feeling of abandoning things, but at the same time, I do like upgrading things. In-place upgrades are cool, but they also feel, I don't say lame, but you know, you get that, oh, I finally have the tier 3 assemblers. Now I'm going to go through my entire factory and replace everything with tier 3 assemblers, which is fine to a certain extent. Oh, there goes my camera. Hang on. Sorry, every half hour, my Canon R10 decides I have to reset. Please do that. So just being aware of what your mechanics are sort of leading your players to do is something to be aware of. So getting too granular, whatever that happens to be, that can be a thing. And if you were constantly like making the player reinvent their, oh, I have to completely redo my ore processing area for copper and for lead or iron or tungsten or whatever your mod lets you play with, that can be a thing. So
yeah, it's interesting trying to balance, you know, if you give a player an upgrade, is it an upgrade that is strictly better, or is it an upgrade that requires a time and or resource and or effort investment to receive the betterness that it offers? And I think Pyanodons does that pretty well because the better that they offer is usually a lot better. And it's also interesting because sometimes the better that you get, whether it's a better ratio or whatever, also requires other resources that are expensive now. And so it's kind of like it will be better, but it's not better yet. And it's up to you, the player, to kind of figure out when that transition happens. Whereas the opposite end of that spectrum, like you said, is just assembler 2s. Well, now I just paste assembler 2s over all my assembler 1s, and it's just better. Everything's better. There's no downside to it other than I had to craft the assembler 2s.
I mean, the downside there is that it creates more pollution.
Does
But,
it create more pollution per energy per item though?
that's
Like
an
it's
interesting
it's
question.
faster
You might be right.
pollution if you make more items, but
I don't know.
I know that it uses less energy per item total because it
Oh,
makes
okay.
them faster. At least I thought that was how it worked. I guess I don't play enough vanilla to say that with 100% certainty, but
exactly right.
yeah. But in most cases, I think the upgraded assemblers actually are more energy efficient. So even though they use more energy per second, since they make things faster, it overall is better. I don't know. Or it's at least close. Either way, our next question comes from Glim. And I think this one it's kind of a long question, but bear with me. So many people who like these kinds of games enjoy the puzzles involved in potential failure states of a system. Do you think this is a critical component of what makes logistic games appealing, or is it just a subset of the playstyles? And an example would be a self-looping fluid process in Pyanodons that needs valves and priorities versus a less hands-on logistics chain that just works, which would be like a vanilla oil, especially at the beginning. There's no byproducts. So there's really no way it can ever back up or fail. So the way that I interpret that question is kind of this idea of like, do you want players have to create contingencies for when things go wrong? And in vanilla, there's not a lot of those, right? And I think the first main one that you do get is the advanced oil processing, where you actually have byproducts. And so if you're wanting more petroleum, you're going to have to do something with all that heavy oil you're making, because eventually heavy oil will back up. But of course, there's the hope that if all the numbers are balanced right, you're just going to use the heavy oil, you're going to use the light oil, and you're going to use the petroleum all at the same proper rate, and you'll never have to deal with any of them backing up. And so that's kind of the question here, is like, is it a critical component of these games to make it so that players have to deal with these questions, or is it just something that some people enjoy and it should be reserved for mods or more complicated games? And I think that's a really interesting thought, because like I love it. And that's part of why I like Pyanodons, is I love the fact that almost everything I build is going to fail in some way if I don't put in like overflow valves or a priority splitter going this way and that way. And, oh, do I have enough ash processing? Because if I make too much ash, this will back up. And I like that, but it is definitely more work for the player. And sometimes players don't like that work. So my initial answer to the question would be, it is not a critical component of a factory game. It is a critical component of interesting complexity. And so I don't know if you can add a ton of complexity without ever eventually adding some of these if-then questions. Because then it's just complexity that's boring. It's just, well, you make A, and then A makes B, and then B makes C, and then C makes D, and then D makes E. And eventually that's not fun anymore. And you need C to make D, E, and F, but you only need E right now. And what are you going to do about D and F, right? Like, I think you need those types of things to make complexity interesting. I don't know.
So that actually, there's a bunch of different thoughts that occurred to me with that question. The first, to a certain extent, is stakes. So, like, obviously you're talking about a failure condition, so you're talking about stakes. What happens if it goes wrong?
Oh, I thought we were talking about delicious steaks cooked on a grill.
I am very hungry. I would love some delicious steaks cooked from a grill. But basically it's like, is it, like making sure the player has something to lose? And the difference between, like, it's this, right? Otherwise it's this. There are no stakes here. Like, if
he's holding a Rubik's Cube for those who are listening.
Oh, sorry. I should probably realize the fact that this is going to be a podcast and I am doing visual things. So I'm holding a Rubik's Cube, right? I've scrambled it. There's no stakes here. If I screw this up, it just remains scrambled. Like, it could be the case that if I'm doing this from, first principles or something, that I sit here and I spin the thing and I have, oh, look, I made progress and I've got some of this done. And I continue doing this. And eventually I get to a state where it's almost solved. And the stakes then become, if I try to move something from one corner to the other, then all of a sudden it's scrambled again and I've screwed up and I have to start again. So there are some stakes, but they're very low. And it's kind of the same thing here. You have the stakes of what happens if it overflows. This was actually one of the problems that I had with space exploration. I would have factories on different planets where there would be some kind of a byproduct situation going on, and I wouldn't have properly handled it. And I didn't, and I did set up like a robot network, but I might have screwed that up too. And I ended up with like 4 or 5 different places that I wanted to go between, but it's very expensive to do so. Like building a rocket to, you can drag your butt to this planet and solve the problem. It's very expensive. And so that it does become a component of that, because as you are playing these games, you want to have that sense of accomplishment. And so you can get that sense of accomplishment by doing things, and stakes tend to enrich that feeling of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go too far with this, then you end up with, something that's way too difficult. I'm thinking of things like the bullet hell arcade games where, yes, there's some stakes here. You're going to lose physical money if you mess up here. In this case, however, you're talking about having to fix something that's come up. If that, what would make that a critical thing? That's sort of the. Do you think this is a critical component of what makes logistics games appealing? I think it can be. I think that each individual person gets a different kind of enjoyment out of these games. I personally don't play with biters; they drive me nuts. But that being said, there are people that only play with biters. There's the Doshingtons of the world that say, yes, all of them, please, right now. Or is it Michael Hendricks, I think?
Death World starting at 100% evolution kind of thing.
Exactly. And you know what? Great. This is perfectly fine. We are different people. It'd be a strange world if we all loved the same things. So I think it definitely can be. And it's kind of a game theory question. And I don't mean game theory as in like game design, but I mean like, teasing out the portions of the population that like these kinds of games, which one prefers this and which ones prefer that. But that also is kind of like the really heavy lifting kind of way of answering this question. I think in general that yes, you do want to have some kind of stakes. I think it is a good thing to have failure conditions at some point. Factorio, as you mentioned, like advanced oil processing does have this, and you do have to. I think we've all been driven a bit nuts at some point because there's no like equivalent of a splitter in pipes in Factorio. Mm-hmm. You have to build it. You have to figure it out. You have to work it out. And this was one of the very, oops, I just hit the mic, sorry. This was one of the very clever things that Wooba did, which was to give you a finite set of tools. You have a underground, a splitter, belts, faster belts, etc. You have logistics networks. You have circuit networks. You have 2 wires, red and green, and that's it. You don't have a third color. You have 2. Cope. And what they said was, you are going to face problems, and these are the things that you have available to you. Good luck. So having these byproduct scenarios is sort of like a very advanced manifestation of that, and using these tools to solve those problems, I personally enjoy. I think Pionodons might be taking it a bit to an extreme, but that's Indeed. Just because everything about Pionodons is extreme. So, okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's a different, it's kind of like a teaching term that I use a lot for a lot of game design related stuff too, which is called the zone of proximal development. As a player, when people start Factorio, and I love the Factorio subreddit because they're really friendly to the like, hey, it's my first base, like here's my spaghetti, like I hope you like it. It's like, there's like 2 miners and it goes on a belt that goes really far, and then the inserters are somehow inserting from one belt to another rather than the belt just connecting to the other belt. And it's this horrific, lovely, like baby's first factory mess.
Learning curve. They're on that learning curve.
Exactly. And they're starting out. And like, if you were to throw a ton of failure states at them from that minute, if they were having, like, if you imagine a player who's never played Factorio getting thrown into Pionodons, where at the early game, not only do you have to deal with ash coming from everything, like everything creates a byproduct.
I still don't know how to deal with ash, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. I hate to cut you off. I still don't know how to deal with ash. I cannot get it out of the furnaces. I don't know. Exactly.
You have to have 2 inserters coming out of every furnace if you want to sort it out. And the nice thing is you can filter with the mechanical inserters. But it's horrible, and it's not fun unless you've already passed kind of that zone of proximal development where it's like, okay, I find all the challenges that Vanilla Factorio offers. not necessarily, they're not fun anymore. It's just they're not new. They're not interesting. I've already learned how to conquer them, and the only thing I could do now is either conquer them faster, as in speedrunning, conquer them bigger, as in mega basing, or conquer them differently, trying to play a different style. Maybe you try to play without trains instead of with trains, or like, but there's not really this world where you just play the same way you've always played, and you don't play bigger, you don't play faster, and it's at that point
You generally move on to a new game.
yeah, it might be fun still, but it's not as fun because there's not that newness. And so that's where things like Pinodons can come in. So all that to say, the zone of proximal development is this area where it's new, it might be a little challenging, it might be a little hard, it might require a little bit of learning from you, but it's not too much of that, right? Because if you throw a new player into Pinodons, they're way outside of that zone. They're not going to have fun. They're going to quit. And these ideas of a failure component give you a space to kind of push the player into that zone where they were comfortable. Well, now you have to deal with advanced oil. Now you're not comfortable anymore. Or you think about biters, right? In the beginning, you're not making pollution, so they're not attacking. But as the player starts to create some factory elements, well, now the biters automatically push you outside of that zone of comfort because, well, now there are going to be some enemies attacking. But the first ones, there's usually just enough that you can kill them with your pistol. It's not a big deal. But it tells you, oh, you're going to have to build defenses. And so Vanilla Factorio, as much as I don't like to play with biters a lot of the time, I do think the way that biters are designed is really smart. And it is constantly pushing the player into this idea of a failure state where, like, oh, if you don't build defenses, your base and you will get eaten. And that's, bad for you. And so it kind of causes the player to realize that something will happen, but it's not happening yet. And advanced oil, kind of in some ways doesn't do that. And it requires the player to figure that out themselves. Like, oh, heavy oil is going to back up if you don't do anything about it, but we're not going to tell you that. And so it's almost the next level of like, there could be a problem, but now we're going to put it on you, the player, to figure out that this problem could exist. And you might not notice it's a problem until you've played for a while and you run out of petroleum. And you're like, why don't I have any petroleum anymore? And then you eventually will trace it back to heavy oil's backed up. And I think that's a really cool design. I do think Vanilla Factorio is designed perfectly for the player who is not heavily invested into the automation genre. I think the players who have played more or are more invested might find Vanilla Factorio a bit on the lower end, and it's like, I need more. But I think that's usually, even new players to Factorio who have played games like Satisfactory usually still love it, and it's like, okay, I want to beat this a few times before I move on to mods.
That's fair. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I don't know if I would describe Vanilla Factorio as quote unquote too easy for like the factory aficionado. But then again, I also haven't played too many other factory games. I played like a little bit of Satisfactory. I enjoyed it. But it was like the third version, not version 3, whatever they're using for their betas. I don't know, but you're right. The vanilla experience is delicious. Like, you have the progress, you have the setbacks. My problem with biters, and actually, I don't know if this was one of the questions in here, but like, essentially is that in order to realize you have a problem, they're eating your base, and so whatever you were working on is done. You have to stop and you have to go solve that problem. But then for a little while, you play this really irritating game of whack-a-mole because you try to figure out where it is, and you're trying to solve it with the minimum amount of force necessary. So you like put down some turrets, you put a little wall around them, and you're done. But then there's another hole to clog, and you start realizing that, okay, actually, I need to really stop what I was doing, completely change my factory, unless you've done this before, and then I have to produce bullets and walls and all these things. And the problem then is the solution feels like a repeated thing many, many, many times. And so I have something that annoyed me, and then I have to do something that I find personally tedious. That's the problem I personally have with biters. I wish there was some other way of doing it. But there is one thing that actually sort of dovetails in with this, and that is, so you have these challenges that you put in front of yourself to give yourself that sense of accomplishment. When I first started playing Factorio, I wouldn't let myself not play with biters. I felt like it was pointless. And that did happen. I eventually did play without biters, but it felt like playing solitaire almost. There was no interaction with anything. It felt like I was just building something, but I wasn't multiplaying. I couldn't show it to my, hey guys, guess what? I made a factory. I can make 1,000 green circuits per minute. It's like that guy who like is playing D&D a whole lot and wants to tell you about his character or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It felt like I was just making my own little world. And honestly, when I eventually figured out what was going on and I could actually cope with that and figure, actually it's pretty fun. I still want to do this thing. Fine. But it took me a while to get there because there was that empty feeling. And I think that whether it's an if then scenario where you can fail because something backs up, or if it's biters, or if it's squeak through and not using it or using it or whatever, you are still sort of tasked with finding the fun in this case. So I don't know. I think there's many components that go into that ultimately.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's interesting. No, I like that. And, back to my earlier thought, it's like, I do think, I think I'm probably on the far end of the spectrum of, I'm playing Pionodons
You're on the far end of some
and Greg Tech New Horizons. I'm on lots of spectrums, I think. And at this point, it's like, I don't think I have a good handle on what complexity even is anymore. It's like I have so many languages, and I'm putting air quotes on that I speak in these games. It's like I've forgotten what it's like to hear the language and it sounds like gibberish. When I'm like browsing through hundreds of pages in NEI and Factorio, like just trying to find one item, and that doesn't even faze me. And it's just like, that's not normal.
How did I
right?
get here?
Yeah, exactly. And so I do think you're probably right. I think vanilla Factorio is not an insufficient experience for most or even almost all players. I think like if someone was maybe coming from Greg Tech New Horizons, for example, they might find vanilla Factorio to be a little bit like, oh, there's not much to this. Because it's like they went from tens of thousands of recipes to like there's only like 100 or 200 in Factorio. I don't know. The vanilla Factorio really doesn't have like a gobsmacking amount of items.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And you look at the mods that put in those numbers, and you go, huh.
Yeah, and vanilla Factorio does a lot with it, and that's what they do really well. And that's, I think, the reason that it's probably going to be fun for anybody is because they do a great job balancing and making the core gameplay experience really polished and fun, but there's not a ton to it. And I do think some people might find that to be not fitting their style, but I think if they can get around that, they'll find it really fun. But back to the original question, I think my summary is that fail states or things that can fail in your factory are not a critical component, and they're just a building block that you can use in your game. And the more of them that you use, the more it gives you those ideas of stakes, like you were talking about, Galdoc, where it's like, okay, if you have more stakes, if things can go wrong and you lose more, that can create frustration for the player. And so it's something that you have to carefully balance. How often are you introducing things that could create frustration for the player? And is it worth it? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Game design is hard. It's hard to make a game that's fun. If it wasn't, then more people would do it. And so I think there's really no right answer to the question, but it is a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately and that's the best part about these is teasing out. It's kind of like building a factory.
Exactly.
Working these questions out.
And as you were talking, I had one more thought on you were talking about playing solitaire, and it made me think of like playing Minecraft in creative mode. I have never enjoyed creative mode in any game because what's the point? And it's like, I know that there's the point. The point could be you want to build something really cool, but somehow that's never worked for me. And I need these ideas of progression to drive me forward. I can't create my own sense of fun in that. And what you were saying about turning biters off, it's kind of like, wait, am I cheating? Is this just creative mode? I can just do whatever I want whenever I want, and biters never attack, so there's no downsides to like expanding big. And it is kind of the same type of idea where you're reducing the restrictions, but in a way that allows you to be more free with doing the thing that you find fun. And in that case, the restriction itself was not creating more fun for you. And that's why some people play creative mode in Minecraft, because they don't want to have to mine the stone that they build with. They just want to build with infinity stone. And that's not a restriction that they find fun. And so it's interesting that everybody's kind of fun meter lands in a different spot. Like, I like more restrictions, I like less restrictions, I like zero restrictions, and everybody lands somewhere different on that.
Yeah, it's the problem of frustration. So, at least to me, there are, and that's only one piece of it, but like the frustration aspect. There's a whole design mindsets that want you to, as a designer, deliberately frustrate your player. I'm trying not to curse. But you essentially want them to be upset. You want them to feel like something got taken away from them to motivate them, to get them to re-engage, to try again, to grow. I mean, it's the same thing when you were riding a bike. You fell, you got a skinned knee, you didn't like it, but you wanted to ride the bike. You were frustrated as an ego hit or whatever you want to. And so there is, I think, a balance. Like some games are just punishingly difficult. I'm
Dark
going to
Souls?
date myself. Well, I've never played it. I choose not to play it. I'm not going to. I am not the right temperament for that game. But like Bionic Commando, 8-bit, NES, 1990, right? That game was tough as nails. But I beat it. And I beat it because I was really frustrated. I don't like that kind of experience these days, but like definitely something to keep in mind. But that sort of like setback and then growth cycle is something that designers need to consider because it also builds a context for having done it. So yeah, I don't know. I think that as one tries to understand how to tease apart the different types of motivators you can use, having those sorts of um, elements of your mental language as you approach it, I think is very important.
Yeah.
Um, I don't like if I ever design games, I do not want to be a sadist. I'm not going to try to frustrate my players to the point where it's like, I'm pulling my hair out. I understand there's like the Dwarf Fortress players of the world, and you know what? You do it. You
Yeah.
are amazing.
Yeah,
I am
and I think what's really one kind of side, this question has led to a million side thoughts, hasn't it? But one side thought
it
on what
has,
you're
but it's a
saying
good
is like,
question then.
as a developer, you really want to be careful on how you market your game, because if you've created a game that creates a lot of frustration, there are lots of players who will like that, assuming it's the fun kind of frustration. But
Yeah.
you have to market your game in such a way that it attracts those players. And
Mhm.
that's another big part of these games is like, is it drawing in the right kind of crowd to be the kind of crowd that's going to enjoy your game? But our next question comes from
Animal Crossing New Horizons, Super Meat Boy Edition.
yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Our next question comes from Kvist, and it's just wild guesses on what Space Age will have, but was not spoiled yet.
Oh dear.
So my brain
uh,
immediately goes to enemies because they haven't spoiled any new enemies yet, and
Not
we
a
know
single
that
one,
we
and they've
know they're
deliberately not.
coming. Yeah, we know they're coming. So this is
Seen the
all
red dots on the
guesswork.
map.
They did spoil that one picture of like a floaty brain tentacle thing way back when they
But
announced.
did they?
Yeah, it was back when they announced. It was in the announcement of Space Age. They showed a picture of it's like a. It looks like a floating kind of
All right, I'm looking
jellyfish
it up
kind of
now.
thing, and a lot of people thought that meant there would be a water planet because of that, which might still be the case, I guess. But the first three planets are not water planets, and it's just like I think they're going to add a new combat mechanic. I don't think they're just going to add new and
I think they have
variety
to.
to the enemies. Like obviously there will be some more variety. When biters attack, there will be some new sprites that are showing up for your guns to attack. But that would be kind of boring if that's all they did, right? And so they have to add some sort of new combat mechanic. And a lot of people have talked about like flying biters that can go over walls or, kind of like phase through buildings, so to speak. I'm not sure if that will be it because that still isn't interesting. It's still just a question of if you have enough guns, nothing gets through, and that's that, right? There's a flying enemy just means that walls aren't as effective, so you need more anti-air turrets or whatever, and that's it. There's nothing beyond that adds.
Sure.
They might add it, but it's not that interesting. It's just like, oh, now we're challenging the player to make more than one type of ammo and more than one type of turret, and then the problem is solved again. So I'm wondering what kind of new combat mechanic they're going to add that's going to be a different type of challenge. It could be enemies that warp into the middle of your base, but you have warning. So you need to like send an automated task force of Spidertrons to go like defend that area, or I'm thinking like Nidus worms in StarCraft, you know, like it pops up in the middle of your base and biters start pouring out, and like you have to build some sort of system that detects an early warning system so you can like kill the thing before it pops up, or you know, like that would be a very frustrating mechanic if it's not done well. But that's the kind of thing I'm wondering if they're going to do, is like something crazy where enemies show up where they're not supposed to be or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so like they have something like that right now if you're playing space exploration, where like meteors can smash into your base, and if you haven't shot them down with your interplanetary guns, I'm sorry for the spoiler. It's not that, it's you, if you've played
That's
the
not a
game,
spoiler.
a meteor immediately lands on the planet and you're just like, oh, I guess that part happened. And then you're playing with Krastorio 2 and you go and you mine it and you realize that uranium hurts you. Anyways, um yeah, anyone who's played those two mods in combination know exactly what I just described.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be, I think they have to have some kind of a new enemy, but I also think they do have to have something that's going to be automatable to address it. Ultimately, this is an automation game. And as much as I would like to have, like, you know, the ARPG Diablo-esque where you go out there and you smash up the biters with whatever +7 sword, I don't know. I think that would be cool, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I know that wasn't what you mentioned, but it's like,
By the
it's
way,
one of those things that,
if you want that game, it's called Rift Breaker, and it's pretty fun.
oh, okay, very cool.
Write it down.
Rift
Breaker is kind of like there. It's not quite Factorio, but it is base building, and you also control like a bot, and you get weapons, and you have to go attack these like spawn hordes of enemies, and they'll attack you in waves once in a while. So it's kind of this combination of like base building, tower defense, ARPG. It's pretty fun.
Okay.
Hack and slash.
That's dope. I
Yeah.
think it's a really good combination. I'm gonna have to check that out because I actually would like to play that kind of game. But it's like whatever the enemies be, whether they are things that can phase through walls or fly over them, whether they appear in the base. There was one that I always wanted to do as like a joke mod, where essentially your base starts attacking you, like the inserters. As you walk by them, they start attacking you, or
like
like
a haunted mansion.
or like your assemblers turn into transformers, stand up and just start running amok. Like all of a sudden, oh look, my oil refinery now turned into a flamethrower and is just like blowing stuff. Yeah. I don't know if they're going to go that far, although that would be dope. I'm just going to go ahead and say science has said that would be an amazing idea. That's a science.
That's funny. I think it should be more subtle, where your oil refinery just subtly changes which recipe is selected, and it doesn't tell you. Or the inserters are like, hey, instead of taking from the belt, I'm gonna put onto the belt. You know, like they just do.
Or like
the
a train
opposite.
deliberately goes to the wrong station or something.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
like completely pollutes one of your lines with iron.
That's like
ore.
the mods that, you know, belts overflow, like the items spill onto the ground. It's those are troll ideas.
So good, so good. Oh, I love that actually. I shouldn't love that as much as I do. But no, I think what's more likely is, so they're going to have some kind of a new enemy. I don't know what it's going to look like, but what they're almost certain to have is something that's going to push back on you. The one thing that I'm expecting that I would love to see, that I've wanted to, like, I have my Galdoc's manufacturing, right? Phase 2 is going on right now. I'm working on stone and glass and all that stuff. And one of the things that I'm working on is the idea of having things that you need to build your buildings with. So like you have to put them on foundations, or maybe it's including some kind of foundation stone with that. And that is to defend against environmental problems. So right now we've seen one, which is like the lightning, but earthquakes. I'm almost like, I feel like earthquakes are coming. I feel like we've seen some seismically active things. And I feel like if earthquakes don't come, someone's going to put an earthquake in the game because it really ought to be there. It would be cool if it was like part of the game itself, but like earthquakes or floods or fires, or just like, think Sim City, right? What did they do to you? Can we do that to the players in Factorio? Because that would be cool. Maybe you have some sort of way of automating to push against that. So whatever that pressure is that gives us that, again, feeling of accomplishment for overcoming it, I think it may not necessarily be an enemy per se, like a new enemy. Like they're going to have to give us some kind of new AI other than just biters, which just come up and eat things or spit on them, or, you know.
Right.
Did I just exhaust everything? I guess there's the worms.
That's fine. It. Yeah.
Like,
it's just spitters and biters.
There's going to be something more there. I know that, like, as the thing that I would love to see, and this is sort of the comp sci person in me, I would love to see finite state machines, where you can have enemies that have more interesting AI decisions that are done with a finite state machine. Obviously, it would have to fit into how they've structured the game, but then you can program all sorts of interesting behaviors and not just have to worry and not just have to rely on the. It probably uses some kind of A star algorithm, but whatever the biter movement AI is that tends to like make them all
Yeah.
clump up and look really satisfying to blow up when they attack your wall, but don't necessarily work for other things.
Yeah, I
So
on the combat topic, which is, to be fair, most of what they haven't spoiled is combat, because when they've revealed the planets, they've revealed, if not all, they probably haven't revealed all, but they've
I
revealed a
think there's
lot
one or
of
two
the
more.
production mechanics on those planets. And yeah, we still have the final planet, which we don't know anything about, and they've spoiled a lot of the quality of life stuff that they're adding. So combat really is kind of the main category of gameplay where they have spoiled nothing. And so
Yeah,
it's,
that's
I
true.
think they're going to add like a new tank, and tank is the wrong word because it won't be a tank, but we have tank, we have Spidertron. There's going to be something bigger and better, and
It's
it's
gonna
going
be
to
a
be
giant hamster
awesome.
wheel. It's gonna be a giant
Yes.
hamster ball, and you're gonna roll over stuff, and it'll be great.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's hard because the Spidertron's already pretty great. So the question in my mind is like, are they going to make something even better than the Spidertron, or is it just going to be like adjacent for different purposes? Maybe there will be something that can go over water. Because right now there's no flying objects, there's no airplanes, so they could add some sort of like plane or craft,
There are mods that add
spacecraft.
planes that just sort of like exist above at like a certain level,
Yeah,
which are
exactly.
great.
And so I'm wondering if they'll add a new vehicle, especially because of the new terrain on the different planets. They might add a new vehicle to get around faster. Because
Yeah,
Spidertron is like medium speed, but it's not that fast. The car is fine, but it has to be on a nice empty stretch of land. So I think they're going to add a new vehicle or two. I think they're going to add new enemies, just that do the normal enemy thing that attack you. And I think they're going to add new combat mechanics that will require, like you said, a different type of automation to fight against it. So those are my wild guesses so far.
can I sort of have that as a nice lead into one of the other questions here?
Yeah.
Let's see, where was it? I'm actually who asked the question? It was something about a thing that you wished. I can't remember where it is. I'm so bad at this. Anyways, it was essentially asking, um, what would you like to see in 2.0 or something like that. But it was what hasn't been done. I don't remember. Anyways, what's it? Can't think of the word. What is the name of the career field that Indiana Jones was in? It's not agriculture.
Archaeologist.
Archaeologist. Thank you. I don't know why my brain just said you will not have this word, and you're live, so this is going to be amazing. So archaeology, I think it would be really cool. Like if you came across stuff as you explored the planet, to give you the impetus to not just explore to find resources and set up permanent foundations, but actually find certain things that you could then do a particular type of research on to figure out about some ancient culture that lived on that planet or whatever, right? And then that ties into something else that you do. Maybe it's like you start off with like a language thing where you have these tablets, or you find data pads or books or whatever, right? And then you do this research and you figure out what was going on, before you got there. I think that would be really interesting because like there's all sorts of things that it could open up, because I don't know if you know this, but Factorio has basically no plot whatsoever. Like there is a plot. You are on an spaceship. It fall on planet. You need off planet. Do that thing. That's the plot. I mean, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think there's like scenarios which probably flesh out various stories, but I don't know if they're canonically linked to this.
No, they're not.
I think it'd be cool if there was like a little bit of plot here. It doesn't have to be like, you know, Portal 2 levels of we spent this many years going over every single line of dialogue to make it amazing and tight and good. But some kind of context would be dope. So
Yeah.
that's
Well, the on all both of the notes, the archaeology idea and the plot idea, I think the Fulgora planet is the most interesting because it already has alien ruins on it of
yeah.
some form, and so it would feel weird I mean, I guess in some ways it would be fine because it's like it's what the game already is. But it would feel weird to me if they did nothing with that. Like if they did nothing with
Yeah.
that culture or that or learning what they are or who they are. But at the same time, how would they do that in a way that feels Factorio? Because like if you think about the game the way it is now, if they tried to shoehorn in a mechanic of like, oh, discovering an ancient civilization, like that wouldn't really fit into the game at all. It would be a very different mechanic than already exists. So they will have to make a new mechanic for this. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, there are some researches that show up in your tech tree that unlock some new things. And that's kind of cool, but I don't know, that then feels not really any different. That's kind of just what we already have. It's like, oh, you land on Fulgora, you find the right building, you get the data pad, and then you get this research. And I mean, that's kind of in the direction of what you're talking about, but it still doesn't feel like any sort of plot or story or archaeology to me. So I'm kind of hoping they add a new mechanic or a new way of storytelling or something. I don't know.
So, as a storyteller, I have some ideas of how to make this cool because you're right. This is something that you can easily get wrong. Like, you can make it homework, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like all of a sudden in your wonderful factory game, your history professor from a class that you stopped taking 20 years ago has come and said, "Did you know you have a test coming up?" So, but like, just as a wild example, let's say that you wanted to introduce a new kind of logistics. Maybe it does have to do with linked chests. Maybe you can like link these chests together in some way, or maybe you have like a teleporter, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you have something that allows you to essentially move things around your factory in some way that isn't necessarily. It's not that it's not satisfied by belts and trains and pipes, but it might be much better or address a particular challenge you set up that's environmental in nature. Um, and instead of like going into deep details about like whatever culture you're finding, you leave mysteries, like open-ended things where players don't get told. I mean, just as a really simple side example, have you ever seen the movie The Cube?
I have not. I
Okay,
know.
I'm going to spoil it. There's a cube, and
Mm-hmm.
this cube is huge. The first movie, there is a little bit of a spoiler here. If The Cube is a movie you want to watch, do not, plug your ears, la la la. But the spoiler is they don't explain why this cube exists. I mean, there is an explanation that says what made this thing exist, but the why behind the thing existing, it's deliberately not told. You are supposed to, as the viewer, sort of like wonder.
Yeah.
And then there are sequels. And in one of those sequels, they do explain it. And it's stupid. And it's
Mm-hmm.
inferior to every single thought that I had as a viewer, not knowing because it was this thing where there was nothing. It's like something that never settled, a dice that never finished rolling. Right? You're still constantly able to fill in this sort of mental space of what happened. I think if you do something similar to that with this, like an archaeology thing, we don't know what that culture, we don't even know what the name of it was. We don't know, whatever, but we know that they used this kind of technology, and this technology is very, very important. Maybe this has something that could be used by humanity. I don't know. The point is that it could have some kind of implications for yet another thing that's not really explained. I mean, we don't know anything about the Factorio's guy's culture, right? He's just an engineer
Right.
who sucks at flying a spaceship. That's what we know about them. Very good at factories, very bad pilot. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of interplay there where you can set something up that leaves just enough unexplained, but just enough explained to give you the notion of there is a deep world here using environmental storytelling. You don't even need data pads per se. Like, yes, you could do the thing where you find the data pad and you get the recipe, or you can do it so that you get this many texts, and then eventually once you get enough of them, now you can actually interpret what you're reading, and then you have a different avenue of getting these things. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's
Just sorry,
interesting.
I'll stop rambling, but that's
You talked about teleportation. That is totally on my bingo card as well for like wild guesses on what we might have on the final planet. Teleportation's on my list in some form,
yep,
whether it's items or the player or both. That's on my list. I do
totally with you.
think I do think it'll be something really high tech. and I haven't played through the end of space exploration, but I know there's these things called arcospheres that get like really complicated with circuits and stuff. And
I don't know what they are.
I don't think vanilla will do the same thing, but I do think they'll do something in that vein. Where there's something, whether it's alien in nature or not, there will be something that feels sci-fi high tech rather than kind of gritty industry tech. Because right now in Factorio, that's all we have. Even the rocket that you launch to space is still just like gritty industrial. And I do think they're going to go a little bit into the sci-fi direction on the final planet. And you can already see, even on the other 3 planets, they're going a little bit in that direction, right? First of all, you have to have a space platform, and the engines for that space platform feel a little bit more sci-fi to me than other Factorio things. They still fit with the industrial, but they're a little bit more sci-fi. And then if you look at the other planets, you're dealing with lightning, and you've got the high-tech circuit assembler thing. And then, on the new planet, you've got these like agriculture things. And I feel like as you're spreading out to these other planets, now you're starting to get a little bit more sci-fi-y. And I think they're going to be even more sci-fi high tech on the final planet. And yeah, I'm very interested to see if they add any form of story and lore, or if they continue on the path they're already on, which is like, we have 0 words in the game that aren't part of a
you're playing the
tooltip
play scenario.
Yeah. It's like literally there's one sentence that you get, or one paragraph you get when you start the game, and that's it. And I wonder if they're going to stick with that or not. It'll be interesting to see.
I think they could go either way. I know what I would love to see, but honestly, at this point, I've come to trust Wooba and their ability to listen to what people sort of give as feedback. So,
yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, next question from Salsa. 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck?
The first, easy, done, complete.
Yeah, a horse-sized duck would just demolish you. Like,
I want cute horses. They're like that would be that big of a horse.
I thought this was I thought the question was always more about which would you rather fight, not which do you get.
Oh, I thought they were asking which would you rather just exist in the universe?
No, they're attacking you and you have to defend yourself.
Oh.
Does that change your answer?
Not really. I have a garden hose attached to my house, so I could just like spray down a bunch of small horses, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to kill a bunch of horses. That sounds horrible.
No, you don't have to kill them, but you do have to defend yourself somehow. I don't know. I think a horse-sized duck is large enough that you wouldn't be able to handle it if you weren't armed. So I think the duck-sized horses is the way to go.
Yeah. I'm still there.
Okay, what about the burrito question? Breakfast burrito or dinner burrito?
Dinner burrito. I love me some dinner burritos.
Yeah, I'm a breakfast burrito guy. Potatoes, bacon, eggs, so good.
Hey, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't turn one of them down either.
All right, back to one more Factorio question that I want to get to is a little bit of a simpler one, but it's basically thoughts on large buildings versus small buildings and like the physical in-game size of the building. And so an example of this is Vanilla Factorio has relatively small buildings. The assemblers are only 3 squares by 3 squares. The largest building is the rocket silo, which you only build 1 or 2 of in most cases. And then there's like the oil refineries, which are still only 6 by 6 or 5 by 5. Can't remember. 5.
I have to look it up every time, but I've done it so many times I don't know.
Yeah. and then there's Pyanodons, which is on the other end of the spectrum, where you are building buildings that are like 15 by 15. Yes. The reproductive complex, I think, is 23 by 23, which is like 4 rocket silos put together for 1 building. And that's on the other side, right? And then you have the 3D games. So Satisfactory, the buildings are also quite large. Compared to your physical size as a player, even just the early constructor is like maybe 3 times as long as you are tall. It's easily twice as tall as you are. Like, they're large buildings just per building. And that's, very different than, for example, like modded Minecraft. Most things you're building are only 1 or 2 blocks. There are the multi-blocks, but even those are, at least in the earlier parts of the modded Minecraft, they're like 3 by 3 by 4, which is only about slightly taller than you are. So they turn out, these experiences of small buildings versus large buildings turn out very different. What are your thoughts?
So for me, at least, it depends on two major things. One, what is the sort of gameplay experience that I want the player to have? And two, I think it's more of a balance. What's the balance between them? Because I think, um, especially considering with Galdoc's manufacturing and how I went with 1x2s, like we're talking
Mini
really,
similars.
they're literally called mini assemblers. And I know that like High Speed wants me to call them fabricators, and I'm like, yeah, okay, it's fair. No, but it's only because I like mini assemblers. I'm a dork.
It's cute.
Um,
I like it.
but the idea was that when it dovetailed in with any of these other mods that I'm not sure what compatibility is going to look like because it's very hard, that you could surround these large buildings with smaller mini assemblers. And so that you could have these really interesting shapes. And so that didn't quite come to pass. When I played, I did a playthrough of it, and I discovered that it was basically just building a whole bunch of these things in little lines, and that's cool. But the what I discovered was that it didn't quite work out the way it planned, which means that if I had to do it again, or if I'm in the future updates or whatever, I may change it so that you're encouraged to make more squirrely builds, so that it's not just such a one size fits all sort of routine. But I think that is the kind of question that you would have to ask to really address that issue, because like big buildings involve more logistics. You need more space, which does add up. I mean, yes, the difference between a 3x3 and a 4x4 is not that big until you have to build 200 of them for a single purpose. And then you need to do another 200 for the next, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
The footprint starts becoming harder. It also it means more walking around. And, we've all done the thing where we have to get across our factory, right? But at the same time, at a certain point, you have to start building logistics to rapidly get you around the factory. You start hopping in your trains and that kind of
Uh-huh.
thing.
Yeah, and
And so,
that's what I wanted to talk about with this is the movement. I think is the most interesting component of building size, because as you have larger and larger buildings, you're requiring the player to spend more time doing player movement rather than factory building. And in
yeah,
Satisfactory, I think that's okay because that game has great movement. It is fun. At least for me, I like playing the game. The feel of moving around, like the slide jumping, the jetpack, the blade runners, like jumping on top of buildings, making catwalks. Like it all is really fun to me. And so I think having a little bit of a larger factory
that's
is
great.
okay because designing a way for you to get around the factory is part of the design. If you build a more vertical factory, if you build more 3D, you can get around to where you want to be faster because you don't have to just go way left or way right. You can go up, and then you have, all of the same thing available only 5 meters further. And so I think it's interesting, in the 3D games, I think verticality answers the question pretty well. But in 2D games like Factorio, well, bigger buildings just means everything's further apart. And in Pyanodons, you start to suffer because you're like, I have to run all the way across my base, and that literally takes a minute or two. And then you're encouraged to plan ahead, like building paths or, like you
Yeah.
said, riding trains just for the player. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. Pyanodons is probably a little too punishing in this respect, and you don't get a lot of ways to move around quickly by default. So I install like the quality of life research mod so you can make the player move faster and stuff like that.
Yeah, for me, the verticality thing is fun, but like that, I did a sound effect while you were in the middle of that of me falling to my doom as I built up because that has happened many times,
But
or
that's
that
kind
did
of
happen
fun
when I was
too.
playing it.
It's a fun
It
story,
kind, yeah,
as long as it doesn't like ruin your playthrough or you're playing hardcore or something. Having the player even die on accident sometimes from falling off their factory is kind of a fun thing rather than a bad thing in most cases because it's a fun story to tell.
quote Gladys, if there's no fear of death, is it even science?
Exactly. Is it even factory? Good stuff. Were there any others of these questions that you wanted to hit on before we wrap up?
Someone had asked, really, what are my plans for circuit production and the circuit face of GMs? I'm not entirely sure what the details are, but in broad strokes, it is going to look like you make some components, you are going to have some boards, and there are going to be mini assembler, quote unquote, equivalents that are going to be things like plasma etchers or things that put chemicals on these things that you then have to weigh. I've actually worked in the clean room before.
Oh, cool.
I worked as an intern, and it was very brief. There's a lot of story behind that, but the so I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff that goes on in there. Like you make these microchips or whatever. You have these evaporators. You put the crucible in there and you evaporate like gold or aluminum or whatever it is on the thing. Um, and it's cool. I feel like there's some gameplay elements there, but I have sort of taken a step back because there are a couple of really interesting ideas that I want to try. But I'm not quite at the point where I'm saying I'm putting Galdoc's manufacturing development on hold, but I might be putting the coding on hold. And the reason is simple. We're talking about 2.0 a whole lot. There's a lot of stuff coming. I feel like every single time they release some kind of Factorio Friday facts that teases any new thing, any new feature, or any new, whatever, I immediately get caught up in the, oh, I have an idea for that. I know how we can make that something that works for Galdoc's manufacturing. And then I'm rethinking what I'm doing. And I love doing that. That's fun. But it's a very weird space to try to develop stuff in. So that's kind of the angle I was hoping to take in answering that question, is just letting people know I'm working on art right now because I'm preparing for these things. But the coding, I'm probably going to be building a couple of other small structures just to make sure everything is running fine. But I may be picking that back up when 2.0 is out and I actually get to play the darn thing.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that sounds really wise. I have also very different vibe, because for me it's more like I've just stopped playing Pinedons because I want to be fresh and I don't want to be burnt out on Factorio when Space Age comes out. So I want to be like hungry for Factorio, and so I'm also on a Factorio hiatus myself, but totally. I'm excited. I'm excited to see where you go with the circuit stuff in GM, because I think circuits in pretty much every modded factory game I play, I think circuits tend to be one of the cooler elements. For me, at least, I really like them. I don't know if it's just because I think they're cool in real life and that translates. I don't know what it is, but I really like them. So I'm excited to see what you do with that.
It'll be fun. There's the big thing that I want to do is I want to make it not homework. Like right now, a lot of the stuff feels like homework. It's the samey stuff, but figuring that out will be that's a long essay answer.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, we'll call it a show there. If you guys would like to ask any more questions to us, please head over to the Krydania Discord. There's a link in the About section, and you can also hit up Galdoc's Discord. There will be a link to that as well. If you'd like to support the podcast, head over to patreon.com/Krydax, or you can support directly in the About section. Next week, I plan to stream the cast at the usual time, which will be Sunday at 3 p.m. UTC. I'll update the Discord if that changes. Galdoc, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Indeed, always a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I solved the Rubik's Cube several times during our conversation. I just dropped it on the mic.
Nice.
So that's what the fidgeting noise in the background has been this entire time.
I was playing with a fidget rock myself, So fidgeters unite.
But yes, no, this has been wonderful. Again, always feel free to reach out. Happy to show up. This is a great experience, and I think that this adds a lot to the community. I think this kind of thing is definitely something that helps makes things better.
Yeah, thank you. And you being here, I also think adds a lot to the community. So we will definitely have you back again in the future. And like I said, if you guys have any additional questions or thought, head over to the Krydania Discord. I'll put a link in the description. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. Always remember, the factory must grow.
Bye.